People have expressed interest in a Three-Star Vagabond Q&A, where they can ask questions about Sweden as well as myself. My life is just sad and pathetic, but I decided to give it a shot anyway. Maybe you'll get some interesting information about Sweden at least in this video. Hi, my name is Miro, also known as Three Star Vagabond, and I'm an alcoholic. Sorry, I mean YouTuber. In my videos, I've covered everything from Viking burial grounds to dog sledding in the far north of Sweden. I've also discussed immigration issues and reviewed the worst pubs in Stockholm. In short, I've had my fair share of amazing and not so amazing experiences. Trigueros asked, what's been my most shocking experience in Sweden? Now, I could answer that with stuff like riots or having our prime minister shot in the 1980s. That's all pretty shocking, but things like that are shocking in every country, so I think that it's missing the Sweden-specific part. In the 2000s, I visited Stockholm now and then, and I started to notice more and more homeless people, and an avalanche of beggars as well. It's still not as bad as, well, any city in the US, but it was still shocking to see Sweden slowly transition from being a country where everyone was taken care of to something slightly less rose-tinted. There was of course poverty and homelessness in Sweden before that, but it wasn't visible in the same way. For me, that was when I started to see the flaws in Sweden much more clearly. Trigueros also asked a follow-up question. What's the most shocking experience I've had outside of Sweden? That's probably when I walked around in narrow alleys in Tenderloin in San Francisco, and the streets were lined with drug addicts and homeless people. Now, I'm usually not scared when traveling, but I did feel unsafe there. There was such a display of raw desperation and potential violence everywhere. That did shock me, especially coming from the pretty safe Sweden. A question I got from Cyber Century Centaur is if I speak Finnish. No, I don't. I can just order beer and insult people, but I used to know more Finnish when I was a kid. I'm half Finnish, half Yugoslavian, born in Sweden, and I had home language instructions at school, so I used to know a bit of Finnish. It also helped that I had a Finnish mom who sounded like a Moomin character. But no, I can't speak Finnish. I do understand a little bit though. Saatana perkele, minä puhun ruotsia. Another question I got is if I'm a journalist by profession. Absolutely not. I just have a lot of geeky interests, and research is actually one of the most fun things about making a video. Since I often mention that Swedes are introverted and asocial, Crawling Sloth asked, how do Swedes socialize? They don't. No, I'm just kidding. They do socialize, but mostly within established groups of friends. So the way to get to know new people is to be introduced to a new group. If you come to Sweden without knowing anyone, then it's actually difficult to start socializing. The same if you move around within Sweden. And on the topic of Swedes not boasting and not talking about salaries, Brujo Milionario asked how to know if you're earning a proper salary if you can't talk to anyone about it. Many people actually don't know if they have a good salary, and that's the same in many other countries as well. If you have a really close friend, then you can ask about it, and there's also official statistics online that you can compare against. But what many people do is that they handle it like a proper Swede. They mutter and make a fist in the pocket, but they don't actually do anything about it. The Three Star Vagabond channel focuses on Sweden and the Nordics, but I also travel abroad now and then. As often as I can, in fact. I do my best to escape the cold and miserable Sweden, where winter lasts for 6 months and the only way to survive is to be constantly drunk. And that leads me to another question. Not the drinking, the traveling. Julie and the Trigueros asked, what do you do for a job that you have all this time and money to travel all over the world? Well, first of all, I have 30 holidays, which is actually pretty common in Sweden. And then we also have a lot of public holidays. I plan my trips meticulously to make the most of my holidays, and I also take short trips in the weekends whenever I can. As for what I do, I'm a software development manager with a developer background. I'm essentially Swedish middle class. I make pretty good money, but I also have some tricks up my sleeve. I don't have kids, I don't have a car, I don't have expensive tastes, and I basically live like a slob. I don't enjoy fancy dinners, and I'm happy with a cheap lager rather than expensive wines and bubbles and stuff like that. I also don't care about getting a big house or a boat or a summer cottage or any of the things that most people see as the Swedish dream. I basically just travel. That's what makes me feel alive, which is actually pretty sad. Julie asked why just about every house in Sweden is red with white trim, and that's actually a really interesting question. In the 1500s, the King of Sweden wanted the whole castle to have a copper roof, but not even he could afford to have everything made out of copper. So he had it painted red instead, which is pretty close at least. In the 1600s, other well-to-do people got the same idea, but they applied it to the body of the house instead. They wanted to paint their houses red to emulate the look of more expensive brick houses. This idea spread more and more, and by the end of the 18th century, red paint was finally cheap enough so that common people could paint their houses red as well. It's essentially a status symbol that eventually turned into a typical Swedish design feature. These days, it's associated with pleasant wholesomeness in Sweden. And a big part of why red paint became so cheap and accessible is because of the Falu copper mine. Falu copper mine is actually one of the oldest businesses in the world, and it's also the reason for the red Dalecarlian horses you can see in Sweden. I'll have to make a separate video all about the Falu copper mine one of these days, but anyway, that's the reason for the red houses. So what's the reason for the white trimmings? That's actually just because it looks nice. There's no interesting story behind it. It's definitely not because red and white are Danish colors. Julie also asked where else is on my travel bucket list. Oh man, don't get me started. I want to visit Japan, New Zealand, Fiji, Tanzania, Russia, Galapagos, Bonaire, Jamaica, and so many places. I also want to do longer trips, like hike a really long trail, or make a road trip all over America, or ride a moped from the southern point of Sweden to the northern point. I'd also like to drive across the Sahara, climb Kilimanjaro, and do more adventurous trips in general. Oh, and also visit Antarctica. I've actually promised myself a trip to Antarctica when I turn 50, as a present to myself. Scientique9633 asked what I think of Swedish men and women, and which country has the most beautiful women. I like that Swedish guys are pretty humble compared to the extroverted and boisterous nature of men in many other cultures. And I like the forwardness of Swedish women. They have this certainty that they can do anything. But when it comes to beautiful women, I have to say that I'm often blown away by women in Finland and Japan. For me, looks isn't everything though. I can't appreciate beauty if there's not also a solid core of a funny, smart and good woman underneath it. I got a really funny question from Sarah that said, I wake up one morning and the TARDIS is in my front room. Where am I gonna go? What parts of history would I change? Or would I go to the future? I actually misread that question first. I thought it said, you wake up one morning and TARDs are in your front room. I would be like, what are all these Danes doing here? Sorry, Denmark, just kidding. Anyway, I'd go to the future, 20 years at a time, to see how the world gradually changes. I'm actually really angry at the fact that I'll never get to see humans colonizing space or all the technological marvels that will be invented. It's just so unfair. I want to go to Mars, and I want to see cars with flux capacitors, and I want to see how society changes. But none of that for me. I guess I'll just have to be satisfied with traveling the world and seeing all the marvels we have here right now. Sarah sent one more question. How many layers of clothing would you wear in the coldest months? Which is obviously not right now. Well, during the coldest months in Stockholm, I have chinos, a t-shirt, a sweater, and my winter coat. Oh, and gloves and a hat as well. And a scarf. A scarf really helps. Nothing strange about those clothes. That's because Stockholm doesn't really get super cold. If it does get really cold, I might add long johns as well. If I'm up north, I basically just add one layer of clothing at the top and at the bottom, and maybe thicker gloves. You don't really need much more if you're moving around. But if I'm sitting still up north in winter, then I need padded pants or an overall and 2 pairs of gloves and 3 pairs of socks. You especially need to stay warm in your extremities when it's minus 20 degrees Celsius. That's minus 4 degrees Fahrenheit for the Americans who can't use Google. Rain GE2EH asked, I've heard that native Swedish people can receive numerous benefits from birth. Are they eligible to receive social allowances without having to work? Under what conditions do Swedish people receive social benefits? Okay, first of all, no, you don't get benefits just like that. We do have a social security net so that poor people will get benefits, but in order to qualify, you literally have to sell all your belongings first to see if you can finance yourself that way. We also have unemployment benefits, mostly through unions. You pay a monthly fee, and if you get unemployed, then you get a sum of money each month. And then there's a bit in between the two, where the government pays some unemployment benefits. But it's not a huge sum, and you have to prove that you're actively looking for a job all the time. But there's a lot of other benefits in Sweden. You can get grants for a part of your rent, grants for having kids, and subsidies on your loans, and many other benefits as well. And you of course have free school, sort of free healthcare, and a lot of other subsidies in general. But it's all paid for by taxes. There is no such thing as a free lunch even in Sweden, so everyone who has a job is paying for all of this. And if you somehow find a loophole to exploit these benefits, well, then you'll be hated by every single Swede. Sweden operates on a trust basis, so don't mess it up. Nicette Audrey Aguilar asked if Stockholm is safe for tourists these days, and yeah, it absolutely is. Sweden has a lot of problems with organized crime and violence, but that doesn't really affect tourists, or most of the quote-unquote normal Swedes. It's still awful and something that needs to be taken care of, but Sweden is still a safe country, and you won't really notice anything about all of that. I'm not worried for my safety in Stockholm, and I really don't think that tourists need to be either. Joe EG7ML asked if immigrants will surpass the native Swede population over time, and I have to admit that at first I thought that this was a troll question. But it's a serious question, so I'll try to answer it seriously. First of all, no, I don't see that happening, but I can see why someone would ask it. Sweden's nativity is declining, and fewer children are born, and at the same time immigration has been increasing. Roughly 10% of all Swedes have a foreign origin right now, and that's a number that scares many people. But if you turn it around, it means that 90% of all Swedes are native, and it would take an extremely long time for that number to go below 50%. And that's assuming that things continue in the way we have it right now. We've always had immigration to Sweden, it's just that the numbers and the policies have fluctuated over time. In the last decade, we've accepted a lot of immigrants, but now policies are changing, and we're accepting fewer people again. I just don't see a scenario where Sweden would become a place where Swedes are in a minority. There's never been a historical situation where a whole country's population has been reduced in that way, excluding external factors like wars and invasions. So it's just not a feasible thing to consider in my view, and let's hope I'm not jinxing things by talking about wars. And that's about it. That was my first 3-star Vagabond Q&A. I hope you learned something new and possibly even interesting from it. Like and subscribe. God damn it. Maybe I should have this as an outtake. Like and subscribe, but most importantly, have a great day.